David thought he had it all under control. His joke landed, the crowd laughed, and his friends cheered him on. But one subtle move from the guard turned his harmless prank into a full-blown nightmare. The mood shifted, and suddenly he was playing a game where only one side knew the rules. Care to guess who lost? London's streets were a chaos of chatter, camera flashes, and the clatter of footsteps on cobblestones. Tourists from every corner of the globe crammed into the narrow walkways around the Tower of London, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the iconic royal guards. Among the sea of gawkers stood David Carson, 28 years old, loud, confident, and just cocky enough to believe the entire city existed for his entertainment. David wasn't the type to just blend in. His bright red hoodie, backward baseball cap, and booming voice ensured he had everyone's attention, even if they didn't want it. His friends trailed behind him, laughing at his over-the-top antics and egging him on. "Yo, check out this dude in the fuzzy hat." David pointed at a young guard stationed near the entrance. "Seriously, who even dresses like that? It's giving medieval cosplay." The tourists around him chuckled nervously. A few took a step back, sensing trouble brewing, but David mistook their awkward silence for approval. Fueled by the attention, he swaggered closer to the guard, holding his recently purchased cup of steaming tea. "Hey, bro, you thirsty? Want a sip?" "Oh, wait. My bad, you can't talk, right?" His grin stretched wide as he waved the cup in front of the guard's face. The guard stood motionless, eyes fixed ahead, his expression carved in stone. But something about his unflinching stillness only spurred David on. It wasn't enough to mock. He wanted a reaction. And the crowd that had begun gathering wasn't helping. Phones were raised, cameras recording every second of David's performance. "This guy's unshakable. What, you're too cool to sweat, huh?" David taunted, voice dripping with sarcasm. Without waiting for a response, not that he expected one, David did the unthinkable. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the tea, its scalding contents splashing across the pristine red jacket of the guard. The crowd collectively gasped, the sound sharp and immediate, like the crack of a whip. Someone in the back muttered, "What the hell is he doing?" A middle-aged woman near the front pulled her child back, murmuring, "This is not going to end well." The guard didn't move. At first, it seemed like the insult had bounced right off his impenetrable demeanor, but then, like a glacier shifting after years of stillness, he stepped forward, deliberately, powerfully. His polished black boots echoed on the pavement as the crowd instinctively parted like the Red Sea. David froze, his earlier bravado evaporating like the steam from the tea he'd just thrown. His friends, who had been cackling moments ago, suddenly fell silent, wide-eyed and slack-jawed. "Dude, David stammered, his grin now a shaky twitch. The tension in the air was suffocating. The guard leaned slightly closer, his voice low and steady, like a thunderstorm on the horizon. "You think that was funny?" It wasn't just a question. It was a warning, one that settled over the crowd like a lead blanket. David's mouth opened to retort, but no sound came out. He was stuck, pinned by the weight of his own stupidity and the unnerving calm of the man in front of him. The guard didn't wait for an answer. He adjusted his rifle slightly, a subtle but deliberate motion that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. This wasn't a man playing a role anymore. This was someone about to teach a lesson. And for the first time in a very long time, David Carson felt something he hadn't in years: fear. The air felt heavier, like a storm was about to break. Most of the tourists who had gathered around the scene began to drift away, mumbling about how things were getting weird. But a handful of onlookers remained frozen in place, their curiosity outweighing their better judgment. Phones stayed raised, capturing every second of the unfolding drama, while whispers rippled through the crowd. The guard took another deliberate step forward. His polished boots struck the cobblestones with a sound that echoed louder than it should have, like a drumbeat signaling something ominous. His face was as composed as ever, but his eyes, those cold, piercing eyes, were locked on David. There was no mistaking the message. This was personal now. David instinctively stepped back, his earlier confidence crumbling. That's when he felt a hand grip his shoulder. It was Thomas, his best friend and the only person in their group with a lick of common sense. "Dude, maybe stop. This is getting way out of hand," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. David shrugged him off with a scoff. "Relax, man. What's he gonna do?" He's just part of the scenery, like a freaking statue. It's not like he's gonna break character or something." Thomas didn't look convinced, but he stepped back, shaking his head. Meanwhile, David tried to puff himself up again, like a peacock trying to hide its fear. His voice rang out, louder than before, as if volume could bring back the control he was rapidly losing. "What are you gonna do, huh? Threaten me? You're literally a tourist attraction," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded more hollow than he intended. That's when it happened. The guard, without breaking his stride, reached up and removed his iconic bearskin hat. He placed it with almost theatrical precision on a nearby stone ledge, smoothing the edges as if it were a crown. The crowd collectively gasped, the sound sharp and synchronized. This was unheard of. Guards didn't break form, let alone remove their hats. Ever. David's smirk faltered. Is this part of the act?" he muttered, glancing nervously at Thomas, who had now taken another step back. "You wanted a show?" the guard said, his voice cold and deliberate. "You're about to get one." He moved toward David with a calm, measured stride that somehow made him more intimidating. The tension in the air was so thick you could practically hear the unspoken thoughts of the crowd. He's not joking. Thomas, deciding he valued his life more than loyalty to his friend, quickly backed away into the safety of the bystanders. David, now truly alone, tried to move, but the guard was faster. In one swift motion, he grabbed David's wrist, his grip firm but not violent. Leaning in close, the guard spoke in a low voice that only David could hear. "You're about to learn what respect means," he said, his tone so calm it was terrifying. Before David could stammer out a reply, the guard pulled out a small radio from his belt and spoke a few clipped words into it. Whatever he said was fast, efficient, and impossible for the onlookers to decipher. But the result was immediate. Two more guards appeared from around the corner, their uniforms identical, their expressions even more unyielding. They moved like clockwork, their steps perfectly synchronized, their presence radiating authority. Without a word, they flanked David, boxing him in like a predator surrounding its prey. The crowd, now buzzing with nervous energy, shifted uneasily. Are they arresting him?" someone whispered. Others just kept recording, their fingers trembling slightly on the record button. David tried to pull away, his voice rising in panic. "Hey, what's the deal? I didn't do anything illegal. You can't just—" "Stop talking," one of the newly arrived guards said, his voice like steel. It wasn't a shout, but it silenced David instantly. The three guards moved in unison, gripping David by the arms and firmly guiding him away from the scene. The onlookers parted like water, unsure whether to cheer, protest, or simply stay out of the way. David's friends, clearly torn between loyalty and self-preservation, made a half-hearted attempt to follow, but one of the guards turned and fixed them with a chilling glare. "Do not interfere unless you want to join him," he said, his tone as final as a slammed door. That was all it took. The group froze in place, their earlier bravado completely extinguished. As David was led around the corner and out of sight, the crowd remained rooted to the spot, murmuring in disbelief. For a moment, everything was still. Then someone broke the silence. "Man, he really messed up, huh?" a voice muttered, and the crowd began to disperse, leaving behind only the faint hum of unanswered questions and the weight of what they had just witnessed. Behind the corner, out of sight from the crowd, David found himself pressed against the cold stone wall. The guards, who moments ago seemed like silent fixtures, now moved with an unnerving precision. Their calm was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity that made David's earlier bravado seem ridiculous. "Hey, come on! What are you doing? It was just a joke!" David's voice cracked as he struggled to wriggle free. The lead guard stepped forward, his every move deliberate. From his belt, he pulled out a small notebook and pen, jotting something down without acknowledging David's flailing protests. Another guard silently pointed to a security camera mounted nearby, its red light blinking ominously. "It's all on record," the second guard said, his tone cold and clipped. "Now listen carefully." The lead guard shut his notebook with a snap and fixed his icy gaze on David. "You think you can humiliate us because we don't respond? You think this is some kind of performance for your amusement?" His voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of a decision already made. "We have rules, and we follow them. But outside of your tourist fantasy, we're people. And now, you're going to learn what it means to face consequences." David opened his mouth to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. Before he could react, the third guard pulled out a smartphone and aimed it directly at his face. The realization hit him like a punch. This wasn't just about reprimanding him. It was about accountability. "Wait, you can't record me," David shouted, panic edging into his voice. The lead guard raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "And what about your right to humiliate someone in front of hundreds of people? Your video's already online. Congratulations. You're famous." David's stomach dropped. He could feel the blood drain from his face. This wasn't a bluff. They were serious. Within minutes, footage of him tossing tea and the guard's calm response began spreading online. Comments poured in almost immediately. "This guy's the definition of entitled." Finally, someone stood up to these tourists. "Respect the guards. They're not props for your entertainment." But the nightmare wasn't over yet. The guards released David, and he barely had time to catch his breath before two uniformed police officers approached. Their expressions were firm, their presence adding an official weight to the situation. "David Carson," one officer began, his voice steady and authoritative, "you're being charged with public disturbance and harassment of a public servant." "Wait, this is insane. It was just a prank," David blurted out, his words tumbling over themselves. "It's not that serious." The officer glanced at the lead guard, who handed over his notebook and gestured toward the security footage. The officer gave a curt nod and turned back to David. "Not that serious? We'll let the court decide that." As David was led toward a waiting patrol car, the remnants of the crowd broke into applause. Someone shouted, "That's what you get!" while others snapped pictures, their phones capturing every humiliating moment. His friends tried to intervene, but the officers cut them off with a sharp warning. "Unless you want to join him, I suggest you stay where you are," one officer said flatly. The group froze, unwilling to risk further involvement. At the police station, David sat in a holding cell, his head in his hands. The buzz of his confiscated phone, now filled with notifications, echoed faintly in the evidence room. He didn't need to look to know what awaited him: ridicule, shame, and endless memes. By the next morning, the video had gone viral. Headlines across the internet read, "Tourists' disrespectful prank backfires spectacularly. Royal Guards show the world how to handle entitled behavior." In his cell, David muttered to himself, his voice hollow, "It was just tea. Just tea." But as the hours stretched on and the online backlash grew louder, it became clear that his joke had turned into something much bigger. For the first time, David realized this wasn't just about tea. It was about learning that actions, especially disrespectful ones, always come with a price. What would you have done in David's place? Do you think his actions were justified, or did he deserve the consequences he faced? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever experienced a situation like this? Don't forget to like this story if it resonated with you and spread awareness about the importance of respect. This story was created to shine a light on issues of disrespect and accountability, aiming to make the world a kinder and more understanding place. Your opinion matters, and together we can inspire positive change.